What's up, everybody? It's Sam here, and I'm here with our first ever NBA video, and I'm so excited to bring you guys our NBA free agency and off-season grades. Let's get right into it. So first up, we have the Boston Celtics. So I gave them a C. So the Celtics landed old Cavaliers center Tristan Thompson, but they really messed up with the Gordon Hayward sign and trade. So if they were able to get a deal with Indiana, they could have gotten some sort of player back that could have been Victor Oladipo or Miles Turner, but they turned every single deal down, and Gordon Hayward ended up walking and going to the Charlotte Hornets. They had a solid draft, and the addition of shooter Aaron Naismith was a huge addition for this Celtics team. All right, next up we have the Brooklyn Nets. So the Nets brought back Joe Harris, which was a big addition, especially to help space the floor and improve their bench. And then they signed two much-needed guards in Bruce Brown and then Landry Shamet. Next is the New York Knicks. So Obi Toppin was a great draft pick at pick number 8, but I gave him a C minus just because they added Elfrid Payton and Nerlens Noel, who are both subpar shooters, and that was kind of a head scratcher to me, especially because this team is rebuilding. They need young players, but they bought players that were older, which is a little bit weird to me. Next, we have the Philadelphia 76ers. So they have our highest grade yet at B+. So they added two shooters, which were much needed as they had problems spacing the floor last year. So they had Seth Curry and Danny Green. They got Seth Curry in a sign and trade for Josh Richardson, and then they just signed Danny Green from the Lakers. Like I said, it's going to help balance Ben Simmons and Dwight Howard shooting troubles, and Dwight Howard was another great pickup for them. And then they also probably got, in my opinion, the steal of the draft with Tyrese Maxey from Kentucky. Next up is the Toronto Raptors. So I give them a C. They accomplished their main goal of this offseason of signing guard Fred VanVleet. They signed him to a pretty big deal, but the reason why their grade got lowered because they lost both Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka, two key pieces from their title run 2 years ago. But they signed Aaron Baines, who will help space the floor and really help make the Raptors a great shooting team up and down. And though their defense takes a hit because both Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka were excellent defenders, and Aaron Baines is a subpar defender. Next up, we move into the Central Division with the Chicago Bulls. So the Bulls general manager and front office once again gave Zach LaVine almost no help. So they have the addition of Garrett Temple, but that only slightly makes up for the fact that they lost Chris Dunn. And then draft pick Patrick Williams. He's going to be a good addition and help with the forward depth that was much needed. But other than that, they didn't really do anything, and the Bulls are going to be once again stuck in mediocrity and become a lottery team this year again, unless Zach LaVine really develops into a great, phenomenal player. Next up, we have my hometown team, Cleveland Cavaliers. So the Cavaliers recently just lost Tristan Thompson to the Celtics. And then they had a great draft pick. I didn't really think so. I was hoping they were going to get Obi Toppin, but now the more I looked into it, Isaac Okoro was definitely the right pick because of how good he is defensively. And this was much needed as the Cavs, with Colin Sexton and Darius Garland and Tristan Thompson, three of the worst defenders in the NBA. This was really much needed. And then they also added Damian Dotson, who adds some much-needed outside shooting. Next up, we have the Detroit Pistons. So I have no idea where this franchise is going. They look like, once again, they're going to stay in the same direction. They have so many horrible contracts, especially Blake Griffin. They just need to, at this point, just blow it all up. They recently did a sign-in trade with the LA Clippers for Luke Kennard. But they lost another key piece. Like I said, Luke Kennard, he was a great shooter, very good scoring the ball, and they're once again going to be stuck towards the bottom of the East, getting a middle draft pick instead of tanking and getting a way better draft pick. This franchise is not doing so hot in terms of front office. Next, we have the Indiana Pacers. So I give them a B-. So they re-signed Justin Holiday. But other than that, not much going on for them. They were unable to perform a sign-in trade with Boston. And then once again, without too many budding young talents, they're going to be stuck in the middle of the Eastern Conference again, probably going to be around the 7th or 8th seed. Next, we have a team that I know a lot of you guys are looking forward to seeing, was the Milwaukee Bucks. So today they finally signed Giannis Antetokounmpo for his Supermax deal. This grade would have been a lot lower if they were unable to sign Giannis, but they also assigned Drew Holiday, and he was a significant upgrade over Eric Bledsoe. But the grade is dropped from an A to an A- because they were unable to sign Bogdanovich, who instead went to the Hawks because they gave him a little bit more money. And that actually brings us to the Atlanta Hawks. So the Atlanta Hawks had a great offseason. They acquired forward center Danilo Gallinari, Rajon Rondo, and Chris Dunn, and also Bogdan Bogdanovic, like I mentioned. They also drafted a solid center in Onyeka Okongwu out of USC. The only thing they could have done a little bit better was added more shooting guard and small forward depth, but that's just a little nitpick. And the only reason why I didn't give an A+ to them, because I only wanted to give an A+ to one single team, and I just felt like one other team had a little bit better offseason than them. Then we have the Charlotte Hornets. So the Hornets kind of had a confusing offseason. So I think they got one of the best players in the draft in LaMelo Ball. After seeing some of his preseason play, he looks like a great distributor. Some of those passes he was doing were very, very good. And then they made some weird decisions. They signed Gordon Hayward to a $120 million 4-year deal. It's a little bit of a head scratcher to give someone that old that much money, but he's going to be a solid addition to help their team now, and he's going to provide some great leadership for them, especially because they have some young pieces set in stone. And then they have two big contracts that are kind of hurting their cap space, and that is Terry Rozier and Nick Batum. But once those contracts are over, they'll be able to make some good moves in future off seasons. Next, we have the Miami Heat, a team that was just in the finals. So I gave them a B. So Miami Heat lost a big piece in Jay Crowder, but made up for it in signing Mo Harkless. He's a little bit of a downgrade, but he will still work. But they signed a big 3-and-D guard in Avery Bradley. This grade also took a hit because of the Myers Leonard contract. They gave him a lot of money, and they barely played him in the finals. It was a little bit weird to me to see that. He is a great shooter, and he can still continue to develop because he is fairly young. But it was a little bit odd to me to see they wasted that much cap space on a center they barely played. Next, we have the Orlando Magic, a team similar to the Detroit Pistons that have been stuck in that middle of the Eastern Conference pack and hasn't done much other than that. So they made very few good moves. So they lost DJ Augustine, who was one of their top scorers from last year and assist leader. But they drafted Cole Anthony, who was the small bright spot in that Orlando Magic franchise. This team, once again, should be in the middle of the pack and shouldn't do much. I think they need to trade Aaron Gordon, trade Evan Fournier, and just blow that whole thing up, because where it is going right now is nowhere. Next up, we have the Washington Wizards. The Wizards have had a very successful offseason. So they did the trade for Russell Westbrook. They had to give up John Wall and a first-round pick for him. And he's going to be great because he's an excellent leader, and he will very much help that young core led by Rui Hachimura. They also signed Davis Bertans to quite a large contract for $80 million. Yes, I understand he is vital to that offense and he's very good shooting the ball, but I believe it's a little bit too much. And then I also think they got an excellent player in Denny Avdija. I don't know how to say it, but after seeing him play in the last few games, he has been a stud. He looks great. I believe last game he went 6 for 6 from the field. He looks excellent. Next, we are heading into the Western Conference. So the Denver Nuggets had a pretty solid offseason. They lost Jeremy Grant, which is a pretty big hit, especially because of how well he played in the playoffs. But the signing of JaMychal Green, he is not quite as well known as Jeremy Grant. He played on the Clippers last season, but he was very solid. He's a great 3-and-D player. And then they also signed veteran Paul Millsap once again. And they had a great draft class this year with R.J. Hampton from Australia and then Zeke Naji. Next up is the Minnesota Timberwolves. So the Timberwolves had a very quiet offseason, but they did what they needed to. So they now have 2 young stars in D'Angelo Russell and Karl Anthony Towns. But they also re-signed Malik Beasley, who had a breakout season last season. They had the number 1 overall pick. We all know they got Anthony Edwards, who is going to be a great guard alongside Ricky Rubio, who is going to be a great mentor for Anthony Edwards. And he will help out that young core a lot, in my opinion. Next is the Oklahoma City Thunder. So this team is had one of the best off seasons. So they didn't really get too much back. They dealt one of their last players from the Russell Westbrook KD era in Steven Adams. They dealt him to the Atlanta Hawks, I believe. Yes, the Atlanta Hawks. As well as they had so much draft capital. They have, starting from the 2023 season, they just have so much draft capital, and it is absolutely crazy to see. I'm sorry, but it was my bad. He is actually on the Pelicans. That is my fault. Kind of got those confused for a second. But nonetheless, the Thunder are having a great offseason and should continue to rebuild under that Sam Presti's excellent general managing skills. Next, we have the Portland Trailblazers, who had an excellent offseason. So they re-signed Old Mello and also their great bench scorer in Rodney Hood, as well as adding some much-needed forward depth in a great 3-and-D small forward, power forward in Robert Covington or Rocco, and Derek Jones Jr., who's a little bit of a wild card, but if he continues to develop, he could be very good as well. They also added Enes Kanter, who should help Jusuf Nurkic off the bench. Next up, we have the Utah Jazz. And the Utah Jazz did exactly what they needed to. They brought back Jordan Clarkson. He was a little bit expensive, but much needed. They also added Derek Favors, and they finally gave Donovan Mitchell his much-needed contract extension. So they didn't really do anything bad at all, but they added what they needed to and got the pieces back that they needed to. Heading into the Pacific Division, we have the Golden State Warriors. So you may be asking why it's a B-. Well, it takes a huge hit with the loss of Klay Thompson in his absolutely killer injury. We will not get to see the Splash Bros once again. But they did add our favorite pretty boy, Kelly Oubre Jr., the man that all NBA fans would simp for. And this lessens the blow to some extent. And they also added a great 3-and-D player in Kent Bazemore. And then, as we all know, they had the second pick in the NBA draft this year and drafted James Wiseman, who could potentially be the center of the future in the NBA. Now we are getting into the teams that everybody is interested in. So first we have the Los Angeles Clippers, who I gave a B. So they added Luke Kennard, trading away Landry Shamet for him. So it's a little bit of a improvement on the offensive end. It's a little bit of a loss in shooting because Shamet is pretty much a pure sharpshooter, but Kennard is a great overall offensive talent, and he should provide some great scoring for them. And then they also added Serge Ibaka due to the loss of Montrezl Harrell. Serge Ibaka should might even work better alongside Kawhi and PG because he is not as much of a scorer as Montrez, but this is still a fairly good addition. They didn't really do too much else, but maybe downgrading might actually help them because there might not be as much competition for scoring. Next up, we have our best offseason, and of course, none other than the Los Angeles Lakers. So the Lakers did everything they needed to and more. So they signed LeBron for 2 more years. They got AD his 5-year deal. They added Montrezl Harrell and Dennis Schroeder, who could potentially be excellent additions on the bench or even as starters, because there are some rumors that Dennis Schroeder might be starting this year, but who knows? They might run LeBron at point. You never know what they might do with their lineup. They have so many weapons. And then they also signed Wesley Matthews and Marc Gasol, who are very similar versions of Danny Green and Dwight Howard in terms of play style, but Marc Gasol will help space the floor a little bit more than Dwight, which will be a little bit different from what the Lakers did last year, still improving on that defense. And the only major loss was Avery Bradley, but that didn't really matter much. He did not play the entire postseason last year, and the Lakers still won the chip. So next we are getting into another team with a great offseason, the Phoenix Suns. So obviously the Chris Paul trade was the highlight of the offseason. We saw what Chris Paul was able to do, bringing that Oklahoma City Thunder team to the playoffs when nobody thought they were going to make it. And then they also added Jay Crowder. So we're going to see if these additions are enough to bring them to the playoffs this year. But I do want to mention they did lose Kelly Oubre Jr. But overall, that Chris Paul is going to help them so much, I believe. Next, we are getting into teams with one of the worst off seasons. So in terms of what they did well, Tyrese Halliburton, he was a great draft addition. He's going to help them a lot for the future. But they lost Bogdan Bogdanovic, and that's going to have a huge impact, especially because it's going to hurt their outside shooting and scoring. Overall, they didn't really do much, but because they were so bad already in terms of what they've done during the regular season, these losses just weren't enough to make up for what they did well. Next, we have the Southwest Division and the Dallas Mavericks. So the Mavericks did a sign and trade where they acquired Josh Richardson for Seth Curry. So Seth Curry lit it up for the Mavericks in the playoffs last year, but Josh Richardson improves their defense significantly, which was a problem the Mavericks had throughout the course of the season last year, as they were rated one of the lowest teams in the NBA. They have lots of cap room for the upcoming season, so I believe they're going to try to sign a big name in the 2021 offseason. In terms of additions at the center position, they added Willie Cauley-Stein for a 2-year deal, which was much needed as they're a little bit weak on the center position and were kind of stacked at like power forward. Next, we have the Houston Rockets. So the reason why I gave this a solid C was because they have not yet found a trade destination for James Harden. So if James Harden stays, I would move the Rockets up to a B- or a B. But if he leaves, this goes straight to a D or D-. If they keep him, they could possibly make a push for the playoffs with the addition of new point guard John Wall, who they acquired in a trade with the Washington Wizards, along with getting a first-round pick. But if James Harden leaves, this team is absolutely screwed. They're going to be left with a mediocre team. They're going to be great shooting the ball, but they're going to be middle of the pack, lower end of the Western Conference, and they're going to be stuck with a middling draft pick, and that's not going to help them at all. But if James Harden leaves, they need to find a way to get John Wall out and just blow it up and rebuild. Next, we have the Memphis Grizzlies. So once again, a team with a quiet offseason. So the team didn't really do too much bad, but they didn't really do too much well as well. The team added another young talent in drafting Desmond Bane. But after that, there's not really any major additions, not really necessary for the Grizzlies. The team is still very young. I believe they're one of the youngest teams in the NBA right now. And they're just going to continue to build around John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. and some of their other young pieces. Next, we have the New Orleans Pelicans. So the Pelicans, they lost a lot, but they have the pieces in order to develop in the future, which is why their grade stays at a C. So they lost both Derek Favors and Drew Holiday, which is going to take a hit, especially to their defense at the guard position, due to the fact that Drew Holiday was such a good defender. But they did add both Steven Adams at the center position and Eric Bledsoe for point guard. So if Zion and Brandon Ingram continue to develop, this is going to be a scary team in the future. They just need to keep drafting some young talent, build around their core pieces, and just make the right moves. And eventually they could become a superpower in the future. And the final team, we have a boring one. The San Antonio Spurs. They didn't make too many moves, and this is why their grade dropped below the average C. What they should have been doing was shopping DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge in order to acquire young pieces, draft picks into contenders. But they ended up keeping them. So I suggest that they should try to shop these players before the trade deadline, as both of them are continuing to regress. And the Spurs are once again going to be sitting at the middle of the pack in the Western Conference, and they're not going to be making much noise. They also lost Bryn Forbes at the point guard position. All right, so that is our final team. So make sure to comment down below what you thought of the video and give any suggestions about more NFL and NBA content. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Peace.